Every year, a German literary society picks a word that has dominated the news more than any other. Obviously, in 2020, it was coronavirus. But back in 1985, it was glycol, although it really should have been diethylene glycol. Well, it sure did dominate the news that year. Der Spiegel, famous German magazine, sort of the equivalent of Time, had many headlines about this. Germans being poisoned by Austrian wines. So what is that story? Well, it was picked up around the world, including in the New York Times, although they didn't get it quite right, because diethylene glycol is not antifreeze. Ethylene glycol is antifreeze, similar substance, so they didn't get that quite right. Now, our story actually starts way back in 1937, and not in Austria, but in the United States. At that time, a drug called sulfanilamide had been introduced. It was actually an antibacterial drug, and it was available in pill form. Soldiers would readily take it when they were wounded in battle. However, in the US, mostly in the southern US, children didn't like tablets. They liked elixirs, liquid versions of the drug. So the SS Messenger Company wanted to find a liquid version of sulfanilamide, and the job was given to a chemist by the name of Harold Watkins. And all he did in those days was to sample solvents in his laboratory. He found one that was sweet, and he concocted the elixir of sulfanilamide. There was no requirement at that time for any kind of safety testing. There should have been, because over 100 people died from diethylene glycol poisoning. And this led to the 1938 passage of the Food and Drug Act in the United States, signed by President Roosevelt. Now, it seems that the Austrians didn't hear anything about this. Austrian wines, especially the white wines, were prized in Germany. These were wines made from grapes that had been left on the vine for a long time. Very, very sweet, full-bodied. But the climate had changed, and the grapes were not fully maturing. So the Austrian vintners had a problem, and they consulted a chemist who said, why don't you just add some diethylene glycol to your wine? That will sweeten it up and give it body. It worked. Now, whether or not he was aware of the toxicity of diethylene glycol is hard to know. He certainly, as a chemist, should have been aware of it. This was a huge scandal. It basically destroyed the Austrian wine industry at the time. And it took about 15 years for that industry to bounce back. And they have. They bounced back in a big way, because now they are testing everything. And Austrian wine bottles are labeled in this fashion to show that every single bottle has been tested for purity. So today, Austrian wines are regarded as being, a high category. Unfortunately, that was not the end of the diethylene glycol story. In 2005 in Panama, the government had bought a syrup from China to make up some antihistamines for allergies and for cough syrups, because the cold weather was approaching. And they thought they had purchased glycerine, which is a widely used solvent to make medicines. Unfortunately, it turned out that a counterfeiter had provided diethylene glycol instead. And again, it resulted in a number of deaths. Now, this raises many questions about checking for substances, checking for drugs and their impurity, especially if they come from China. There have been no cases in Canada or the United States of diethylene glycol poisoning, but as you can see, the history is quite a tragic one. And now you understand why in 1985 the German society chose glycol as the word of the year.